Hey, friends. Hello, hello. Welcome to the Doing Good is Simple show. I'm your host, Chris Marlow. Very excited that you're here, that you're hanging out with us on this whole new episode, this new series. One of the things I wanted to do was I wrote a book 10 years ago called Doing Good is Simple. Um, if you haven't read it, you should. I think it's still relevant, and that's actually what we're going to talk about. When you write a book and 10 years later, you begin to ask a question. Is the book still relevant, and does the book still work? And so one of the concepts of doing good is simple is the fact that we, everyday normal people like you and me, can make an impact in the world. So welcome to the show. Chris Marlow, Help One Now, founder of Help One Now, author of the book. More than anything else, I'm just a normal person who wants to make the world better, and I want to be able to do it with people like you. Often people ask, why do we need another podcast? Why do we need another show like this? And here's the thought that I have. Right now in our world, things feel very, very heavy. Things feel a little confusing. And oftentimes when things feel heavy and when things feel confusing, it's so easy for us just to take a step back and kind of not engage in some of the complexities that are taking place. I actually think this is a moment in life where now more than ever, people like us need to fully engage in what it means to be a good human and a good neighbor. Now, we're here in kind of even the LinkedIn world. We're often in LinkedIn. You think of networking, you think of sales, you think of all of these like real life issues. One of the things we don't often think about, where we take a step back and we ask deeper questions about humanity, about neighboring, about what it means to bring life and hope into the world, even with the complexity. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take 10 weeks and we're going to walk through the book chapter by chapter. And it's really, really fun because we're going to have amazing guests. These are guests who you are going to love. They are just really good people. They're building beautiful families. They're building beautiful businesses. And yet the question these guests are asking themselves is, how do I make the world better? And can doing good still be simple? As we think about this moment in time, this moment in history, it's easy for us as humans to just think, wow, everything is just too big and too complicated. But here's the thought I would have for each and every one of us. What if we had a community of people and we asked ourselves, what does it mean to make the world better and more beautiful? So this is a moment each week at lunchtime, 12:30 Eastern, where we can just maybe pause selling, pause productivity, pause anxiety, pause even like thinking about our schedules and like taking our kids to 1,000 sports programs or all the different things we need to do around the house. Maybe we just pause and we say, I'm going to dedicate this moment for the next 10 weeks to just recalibrate on what it means to do good and make the world more beautiful. Here's another thing. If you're a faith-based person, if Jesus is the center of kind of your universe, or even if you're someone who's trying to figure out the whole Jesus narrative, one of the things I think we need right now in society is a true north. We need to always be reminded about what is life all about. And so there's this amazing story in scripture that always brings me back to the center. Not social media, not news outlets. The one thing that brings me back to the center, even that theology, when I think about theology and how complicated scripture can be, and like, scripture can even be confusing. The thing that brings me back to center is this one story. It's just one hope that we all have. And the one hope is simply this. When God said the most important thing that we can do, this is the words of Jesus, was to love God and to love others. That's kind of the whole breakdown of what society is all about. As humans, as followers of Christ, the question we have to ask ourselves daily is, how am I going to love God? And how am I going to love my neighbor? And that is the core question of our lives. And so Jesus is a guide that reminds us that we can do those two things. And if there are two efforts that we need to make sure we're doing well, it's loving God and loving others. There's nothing in life more important than those two things. And so for the next 10 weeks, you're going to hear from amazing people who are doing amazing things around the world, running a family, building a business. They have all the things that you have. They have all the stresses, all the anxieties, calendar full of responsibilities. And yet the question they're going to ask is, how do I love God? How do I love others? So I'm very, very excited. I wanted to just take a step back and remind everyone why I wrote this book. I wrote this book in 2015. And the question I was asking was simply this: can people like us make a difference in the world? And at the time, I knew we could. 10 years later, when so much seems to be going on in the world, even last night, we got a phone call from a friend of ours in Haiti. And if you've been around the Help One Now ecosystem for a while, in 2010, 2011, 2012, we spent a lot of time with a friend, Pastor Sincere. Pastor Sincere helped run a tent city after the earthquake in Haiti, one of the biggest natural disasters in human history. And Pastor Sincere helped run this tent city where like 80,000 Haitians, hopefully I got that number right, my team will tell me if I didn't, lived in this tent city for years after the earthquake. Basically, that tent city became a church and a school. And if you know anything that's going on in Haiti right now, you know it's kind of a lawless country, sadly. And if you've spent time in Haiti, one of the things you recognize is there's no one more beautiful than the Haitian people. They have struggled and they have suffered so much. And last night we get this phone call, and Pastor Sincere was basically saying, pray for us. My neighborhood is being taken over by gangs. Individuals are setting fires on houses, kidnapping people. There's shootings going on. When you hear those stories, the question you can easily ask is like, how am I going to help Pastor Sincere in Haiti? And that's the question we were asking in the book. When we hear hard, complicated stories, how are we going to help? And will it really matter? And so here's what I will say. Last night, we helped Pastor Sincere just by saying, Pastor, we are praying for you. And we asked a bunch of people to pray. And oftentimes we think about doing good as simple. Last night, the practice of doing good as simple was simply this: we are praying for our friends in Haiti who are suffering. That's the type of people we want to be. We want to be the type of people who show up and do what we can to make a difference, whether that's giving cash to like build a school or that's praying for someone in need. That's the type of humans that we want to be. And so the premise of the book is very, very simple. And the story, the background is, maybe you've heard it many times. It's me taking a trip to Zimbabwe. I was much like you guys. I was living a really good life in Austin. My kids were 7 and 5, and a friend of mine asked me to go visit a friend of his in Zimbabwe. For 3 or 4 years, I said no. I said I didn't have time. I was busy. I didn't want to travel across the world. But deep in my heart, I knew that what I didn't really want to experience was hard things. I didn't want to see something that I may not know how to fix. And the American mindset, often what we want to do is when we see a problem, we think the solution is fixing the problem. And often the solution is just becoming a friend to the people who are going through the problem. Last night, we were just friends to Pastor Sincere and our Haitian friends. We were just showing up in the midst of the complexity and saying, you're not in this alone. That's one of the realities of doing good is simple. We know the world is complicated, but it doesn't mean we can't make a difference one way or another. Back to that Zimbabwe trip. I'll never forget kind of the moment. We flew to South Africa. We spent 8 days in Cape Town. We flew into Joburg. We got into a van and we went to the border of Zimbabwe and South Africa. We're at this border, and the intensity was so fierce. It was wild. It was no one on the South African side of the border and thousands of people on the Zimbabwean side of the border trying to get into South Africa. In 2007, Zimbabwe was on the verge of a civil war. Starvation was everywhere. It was just a really hard situation. And I remember being with a friend and Stephen, and Stephen introduced me to 2 new friends, John and Orpah. John and Orpah are these amazing humans, these maybe the most beautiful people you can ever meet, period. And they were serving in just outside of Harare, Zimbabwe, in a very, very hard community full of a lot of orphans and extreme poverty. And they asked me to go visit their community and to visit the kids in the community. And I remember being in a van with them, and we stopped at a gas station, and we had to fill up the van with food and fuel because Zimbabwe had none. You would go to a grocery store in Zimbabwe and the shelves would be completely empty. Imagine a mom or dad trying to figure out each day, how do we feed our kids? That's what, when we talk about doing good is simple, some of the things we're trying to solve isn't the meta. Sometimes it's just the micro. It's helping parents feed a kid. So after loading up the van, we went into the other side of Zimbabwe and we drove hours into the middle of the country. We arrived in Harare. It was 4 a.m. and we were literally exhausted after 2 full days of travel. And I remember Pastor John asking me a very, very quiet, simple question in this van. He said, Chris, do you mind if we stop at this gas station? I want to check on some kids. And I didn't really know what it meant at the time. I had no context. I just knew I was tired and I wanted to go to bed and just get some sleep. And of course, I'm like, sure. I mean, this is your country. Of course, we'll stop at a gas station. And I remember driving the van into the gas station. It's an abandoned gas station. And what I saw on the ground was about 80 kids. And they were all my kids' age. They were all 5 to 7. 3 to 8 was kind of the age group of these kids. And they used this gas station as a makeshift home every evening. And by day, they would go out in the community and try to figure out how to provide for themselves. These were young kids created in God's image, double orphans, going through all kinds of pain and hurt. And they had kind of rallied around this gas station to create a home and a family. And I remember getting out of the van and being surrounded by these kids. And one kid grabbed me by the arm and squeezed it incredibly tight. He dragged me low, made eye contact, and he, with deep humility as an 8-year-old kid, just trying to imagine life, an 8-year-old kid asking me these questions. He says, sir, thank you for visiting my country. I'm really sorry it's in the shape that it's in. I don't want to beg you for food, but my friends and I, we have nothing to eat. And the kid just asked this one question. He said, is there anything we can do to work for you so we can get something to eat? This was an 8-year-old boy who was on the edge of starvation, trying to figure out how to get an empty stomach full. So when we talk about doing good is simple. Sometimes it's the macro, it's the big things. Oftentimes it's the micro. It's how do I help this child get a hot meal in his belly so that child can have hope for one more simple day. One of the things I told this child, and I was completely overwhelmed, is I told him no. I said, man, I have nothing for you. I was just completely overwhelmed. I remember getting in the van and driving off. And I couldn't believe that in 2007, every 6 seconds, a child like that dies because they don't have access to food, to shelter, and to sanitation. And I thought, this is wrong. This doesn't have to be this way. I don't know if I can fix everything, but it feels like I can do something. And I think that's the premise of doing good is simple. We can't fix everything, but we can do something. And so the next day, which was like 4 hours later, after a few hours of sleep at Pastor John Orpa's house, we visited these 32 kids in Mushuavana Kids Home. It's a community we still support. Some of those kids have now graduated college and they're successful adults. Some of those kids that we met that day were reunified with their family. Some of those kids, the story didn't work out as well as we liked. There was no perfect solution to extreme poverty, but the best solution is to take a step forward to figure out how can we help. And so when I think about those 32 kids, I remember flying back home to Austin, Texas, and we're in 2007, we were on the verge of the 2008 economic collapse. It was beginning to happen. And I began to ask myself a simple question: how in the world do I help these 32 kids in Zimbabwe? What can I do? I'm a pastor of a church. We're planting a church in Austin. I have 2 kids. I didn't just have all kinds of money in the bank that I can just write a check and fix everything. And everyone around me was getting nervous about the economics of the time. And so here's what's amazing about the doing good, the simple part. Oftentimes we do good in the best of times, but when we have the true north, when we're reminded that Jesus calls us to love God and to love others, we can also do good in the hardest moments. And so we begin to ask ourselves a really important question: what can our community in Austin do to help these kids in Zimbabwe? We can't fix their entire lives. We can't change the government of Zimbabwe. We can't snap a finger and solve it all. But one of the things we realize is we can help 32 kids in Zimbabwe. We can do that. And so little by little, we begin to throw garage sale parties. It was wild. We're Americans. We have a garage full of stuff. We have storage units full of stuff. And we just begin to say, what if we begin to get rid of our stuff and sell it and help these kids go to school and get 3 hot meals a day? And what if we begin to fix up the kids' home that they were living in so they can have a better living environment? What if we begin to help bring on some more team members so they can serve these kids better? It's not perfect, but it's better. And sometimes that's the thing about doing good. It's not perfect, but there's progress. We're trying to make progress, whether it's here in America, whether it's somewhere around the world. We're trying to take a big step forward and help people live a better life. And so we begin to do that. And we begin to see this community transformed. And so for the first 4 years in the Help One Now ecosystem, we begin to really do 3 things. We begin to partner with high capacity local leaders, people like John and Orpa, or people in Haiti like Pastor Sincere. And we begin to say, how can we help you help your community? We want to be invisible. We don't want to be the hero of the story. I met some of the most brilliant humans in the world. And all they needed was folks like you and me to show up behind them and say, you know what, Pastor Sincere, you know what, Pastor John or Orpa, we will stand with you side by side, and we will help you fight extreme poverty in your community. And the only way I knew how to do that in 2007 was by throwing garage sale parties and having lemonade stands. A lot of our friends in the summer, if you've been to Austin in the summer, it's like the worst place in the world. It's like you could put an egg on the concrete and it just disappears. It's like magic. It's where magic came from. It's so hot, it's unbelievable. And so there's construction going everywhere. So one day my 2 daughters, they heard the stories of these kids in Zimbabwe, and they were like, hey, wait a minute, what if we just throw a lemonade stand? What if and we'll take all the money and we'll send it to Zimbabwe, so that way we can get food and water and help for the kids. And so not only did my kids do that, hundreds of kids did that around Austin, Texas. And we took those garage sales and we took that lemonade, the proceeds of those 2 things, and we would just send it to John. We weren't a nonprofit at the time. We were just neighbors. We were just people trying to help. And we begin to realize we're onto something. What if we can do 3 things? What if we can empower high capacity local leaders to care for kids who are vulnerable, kids who are double orphaned, and oftentimes kids who are being trafficked? And then what if we can help transform their community? So Help One Now was the idea that doing good was simple, and it became a nonprofit that said, let's do something together where not only we can help John and Orpa in Zimbabwe, we can begin to help a lot of people all over the world. And so that's what we're talking about. So 4 or 5 years later, I began to write this book in 2015. And now it's 2025. 10 years ago, this book, I spent a lot of time in coffee shops going through the book. And 10 years later, the question we're asking and why we're doing these 10 episodes is, does it still work? Can we still make a difference? Can we still make the world a better place? So there are a couple things I want to just encourage each and every one of you today. Next week, we'll have guests and we'll have interaction. It's going to be really, really beautiful. Andy Hooper, who's the board chair of Help One Now. Andy's built hundreds of restaurants all over the world. He has one of the most amazing families. You guys are going to love Andy and his story. And now he began to help us back in the day when we were throwing garage sale parties and we were doing lemonade stands. and then we'll have a whole bunch of other guests. But one of the questions that we have to ask ourselves is simply this: how do I practically make doing good simple in my lives? And so there's two things I want to encourage you with today. The first thing is this: sometimes we can't overcomplicate it. We're living in a world where if we don't do it perfectly, we freeze up, so we don't do anything. One of the things I want to encourage you, and what the book talks about, is there's no perfect way to make the world better. There's no perfect way to solve some of the crises we're suffering and dealing with in the world. But it doesn't mean we can't engage. And so one thing that we want to encourage everyone to think about is, what's the one or two things that you can do to make the world better in your backyard, all around the world? Actually, even from a scripture level, the word neighbor didn't actually mean your next door neighbor. The word neighbor was just a concept. It was just how do we help others live a better life? And the second thing I want to talk about is what we've talked about over and over and over, is the impact matrix. That every single one of you watching this show, you have 4 ways that are so critical you can make a difference. We call it the impact matrix. The first is your gifts. You are given gifts by God, and those gifts can either be alive or they can be dead. Those gifts can be used to build empires that are individual and for yourself, or those gifts can be used to build an empire that makes the community as a whole better. It's a choice that we all get, and it's a choice that we have to give back to others. And so your gifts. 2 is your talents. Each and every one of you have so many talents. You're talented when it comes. One of the things we did back in Austin at the very beginning days is musicians. They would host these events and live concerts and raise money for the kids in Zimbabwe. They use their talent as being a musician or in business or in education. So you have gifts, you have talents, you have passions. What's keeping you awake at night? You can't solve every problem. You can't even be engaged in every problem. But for you, the question maybe you even asked today is what do I really care about? What's the 1 or 2 things that I care about that keeps me up at night? And I want to engage in those activities to make the world better. So you have gifts, talents, passions. And the 4th thing you have is resources. Each and every one of us, we have resources. In 2007, the resources I had was a garage full of stuff. The resources my kids had was a lemonade stand. We all have different resources. We have money and we have networks. Even here in this space where we're doing a live show that really engages LinkedIn and Instagram and YouTube. Think about the networking opportunities we have here to spread the word that doing good is simple, and yet doing good is also significant. That a show like this can actually create movements that make the world better and brighter. So the impact matrix, your gifts, your talents, your passions, and your resources. These are 4 ways that you can make a difference. In the next 10 weeks, we'll talk about them over and over and over, because in a world that feels complicated, in a world that feels heavy, it's so easy. And I'm hearing this from so many people. We get asked all the time in Help One Now's world, does it matter? Are we making a difference? And so just a reminder, Help One Now on many levels has evolved. Back in the day, we were empowering these leaders to care for these vulnerable kids, to see these communities transformed. And we did some amazing work. Those kids in Zimbabwe, a few years after I met them, a church in Austin raised $15,000, and they put a clean water system. They raised $15,000 because a whole bunch of small groups did garage sale for orphans. Garage sales. And they took the money, and we built a water project in Zimbabwe. And today, people still get clean water out of that project. I think that was 2011 or 2012. Doing good is simple, and it's significant, and it's important, and we need to do it. One of the things that we've done and we've evolved is we still empower leaders, the most brilliant humans in the 8 countries we serve in. But one of the things we recognize as a nonprofit is the kid at the gas station and those 32 kids in Mushawavana, they most likely had a loving parent or a family member. And that loving parent had a scenario to deal with. And that's, if to keep my kid alive, often I need to give my kid up to an orphanage. And then parents feel deep, deep shame. Imagine trying to figure out, if you're a mom or if you're a dad and you're asking yourself a question: if the child stays in my home, they may starve. Or I can drop a child off at a kid's home and they could live but just not in my house. The amount of shame that happens in that is so incredibly complicated. And so we begin to ask ourselves a quick question. What if a mom or dad didn't have to like ask themselves that question? What would it look like to change their world? We can't change the whole world, but we can change one person's world, the one family. We can help one family thrive and flourish and succeed and take one giant step out of extreme poverty. We begin to realize we could do this together. Actually, we were in Austin and we were at a friend's house, and they raised significant money to launch a prototype program that we call our Family Empowerment Program. And the Family Empowerment Program is a very simple concept. What if we helped men and women in developing countries who are suffering from extreme poverty, but these men and women have big dreams, big hopes. They do not want to sit in a line and receive free food. They want to get up every single day and go work and chase their dreams and provide for their family and give back to their own communities. They don't want to hand out. They want to be empowered. You and I can be the supercharging force to help empower those families. We can give them one shot, so that way they can then take that shot and transform their own community and their own family. So our Family Empowerment Program is very, very simple. How do we help kids go to school? How do we help families launch businesses? And they can launch a business. It takes $1,000 US. So when we ask, is doing good or simple? Here's the question. If you invested $1,000 to help a family launch a business, and that family was able to go from making $1 or $2 a day to 7, 8, 10, 12, and a child could stay home and not grow up in an orphanage, if $1,000 can change a family's life forever, is doing good still simple? It's $80 a month to change a family's entire life. Here's what's amazing. When you change a family's life, you absolutely transform the community. Here's what's also amazing. When we think about discipleship, it's so easy to think about discipleship only through the lens of spiritual, water baptisms, the church attendance, salvations. I just think discipleship is far greater than that. I think when Jesus comes to transform our hearts and our lives, he comes to bring life and life to the full. For a family living in extreme poverty, life to the full is a little loan, a little business opportunity, and then they can chase their dreams forever. And so I'm so excited for the next 10 weeks. We're so excited to share with you some of the most amazing stories. And what I'm really excited is just to remind each of you as you watch this show that you can, and many of you are making such a difference, that we don't have to just pay attention to national news outlets or to the never-ending social media scroll. Instead, we can take a step back and we can ask ourselves, what if I helped do one thing, and that one thing changed a family's life forever? It changed a child's life forever. And so one practical thing I will communicate and just help everyone understand, there's kind of 4 kind of areas that I think are really encouraged that you can engage in when we think about doing good. One is your local church. Is your local church involved in making their community and the world better? If you don't know that, I would go to your senior pastor, your lead, whomever, and I'd ask that question. What are we doing to bring light and hope into our community and into the world? I want to be a part of that. Be a part of your local church. Thriving local churches can make the world so much better, and it's super important. You have 2 kind of nonprofits. You have nonprofits like us who do international work. You have nonprofits that do local, and then some that do both. What nonprofits that you love, you want to support? When you're generous, when you consistently give to a nonprofit that you trust and that you love and that you care for, and that's connected to your passion, it can feel unique because you often forget you're doing good, but you are doing good. There are so many people that support Help One Now year in and year out, over and over and over. And those 32 kids in Zimbabwe, some years we serve anywhere from 60 to 100,000 people. Not because 1 or 2 people are writing mega checks, because a whole bunch of people are being generous. They're doing what they can to make a difference year in and year out, again and again and again. And that compound interest creates compound impact. And then there's a tipping point. So doing good is simple. Started with the 32 kids, and we're doing a lot more work around the world. And yet we still believe there's so much more to do. So hopefully your heart can be encouraged today. We want you to know that this can be a community that you can be a part of. You don't have to be a part of Help One Now to be a part of this show, to be a part of who we are. We're just everyday normal people, humans trying to make the world better. And we want to remind you that your generosity can, in fact, transform a child's life. It can transform a family's life. But actually, your generosity will also transform your life. When you get connected to relationships, it's so much more than writing checks. When you get connected to people, and when you begin to realize that God will use you, God will use your resources, your gifts, your talents, and your passions to help other people thrive and flourish. And then God will use them to help you thrive and flourish. And then it becomes a mutual connection where we're serving each other along the way. It's not a one-way street. It's a two-way street. Our friends all over the world serve us in ways that we can't begin to describe. Like my faith, when I wake up this morning and I'm thinking about my friends in Haiti and their courage and their trust and how much they believe in God. Some of them won't leave the country and they're willing to lose their life because they care about their neighbors so much that instead of chasing their own safety, they would rather live in that danger because they believe the importance of being a good neighbor. They refused to give up. They're chasing something greater, something more significant. It's almost like the story of Jesus. Love God and love yourself. Love God and love others. And you got to love yourself along the way. So really thankful. Can't wait. Every Wednesday, 12:30 Eastern, we're going to be here for the next 10 weeks. Tune in. Do me a huge favor. Share this with your friends. Share this on social media. Go back and listen to this. It's a conversation. Think about it as a lunchtime conversation. Get yourself a lunch, something to drink, and just listen and engage to what's happening. Over and over, we just want to remind you that doing good is simple, and it is significant, and it is effective. And after these 10 weeks, I think your heart's going to be encouraged. I think you're going to be full of hope and full of love and full of excitement that somehow in the midst of what can feel like a chaotic world, we can remind ourselves that we are the type of people who will show up and do hard things and love God and love our neighbor along the way. So thanks for hanging out today. Can't wait to be back next week. And remember, doing good is simple, and you're already probably doing good even if you don't know it. Thank you for being here. See you next Wednesday at 12:30 Eastern.